Yeah, welcome in the audience. Welcome to Conversations. A pleasure to welcome to the program Gregory S. Paul. He's an analyst of atheism and religion, and he's also a paleontologist of great note and an illustrator. He's got a very interesting story to tell. We're going to be talking a good deal about atheism and religiosity or religious questions in this program. But Gregory, welcome so very much to Conversation Manhattan Network.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
Good to catch. We caught up with you. We've had a few meetings with you in the past. Welcome back to New York. Could you share your own background, born and raised, and educate a little bit, and then we can talk about, about the issues that we want to address.
I was born in Washington, D.C., in the same hospital they took Reagan to when he was shot.
Oh, really?
Grew up in Northern Virginia, pretty much across the river. And this had a lot to do with where I am, actually, because on the one hand, there's the Smithsonian, which is a great place for science. And I went down there a lot, and that's when I really got into that and into dinosaurs and so on.
Right.
But another thing about Washington, D.C., it's very political.
Surely.
And my dad particularly was pretty political and a conservative bent, JCs and that sort of thing. And my parents were the only people I knew in the elementary school I went to that voted for Goldwater.
Wow, in '64.
Yeah.
And
I was
he needed all the votes he could get in that. Yeah, right. Yeah.
And I was pretty conservative as a kid. Not extremely so though. And I was for Nixon. And I was for the Vietnam War. But then I started shifting over time, particularly in the 70s. And one of the reasons is I got very interested in military matters too, which I'm really into. And that's a good way, if you know what you're doing, to become a liberal. Because after a while you realize the shenanigans that are going on. That's a whole other subject.
Yeah, no, I can see, yeah.
About how they're lying to us about what the enemy has and what we have. But, so I'm going down to the Smithsonian. I got very, very interested in dinosaurs. Started illustrating them when I was very young. My mom kept all the pictures and so on. Yeah. So I'm doing that, and it was in my teens that I started learning about evolution and more about science.
Sure.
And another important thing that happened was that my father got all these magazines like Argosy and True Tales that were talking about UFOs are real and that sort of thing. They were trying to give that impression, part of this industry trying to do that. And I believed all this stuff. In freshman year of high school, I got a book out by Philip Glass, I believe his name is, one of the first debunking UFO books. And I didn't know that when I picked it up. I thought it was going to be another book talking
debunking the UFO phenomenon?
Well, I thought it was going to be a book talking about how UFOs are real.
Oh,
and I read it, and I said, this guy is showing these incidents I'd read about before, what really happened. And that was very important for starting to make me a skeptic, to start looking at things rationally and scientifically.
Right, okay. Had that attitude, scientific rationality, been permeate the family setting?
Oh, no. My father was getting Argosy and True Tale magazines.
Oh, True Tale, I don't know.
Oh, these are old magazines, are probably out of business. But they had these stories, these kind of, slightly shock stories about UFOs and that sort of thing. My mom read horoscopes. There's no way we can get into the religiosity of my family, because it's very complicated, but my mother was Mormon ancestry. Mormon? Yeah, and you can go, I can't remember his name right now.
Adams,
Noah Thomas Gaiman. He's on the web. The history of this man. He went on the Great Trek. He may have been a bodyguard of Joseph Smith, knew Brigham Young, had 6 wives and all this. My grandmother was born in 1901, grew up in a Utah frontier town, and she died in 2002 in Arlington, buried in Arlington Cemetery with her husband. And so there's some Mormon influence, but my mother was also a chain-smoking alcoholic, so I don't want to give too much of an impression of that.
Boy, these are Gothic novels things.
There's all sorts of stuff going on here. It's really kind of cool.
I lived a year at Logan, Utah, with the Mormon people.
Oh, really?
University of Utah.
Okay. Yeah.
Wasatch Mountains, beautiful country. Yeah.
And
interesting culture.
But at the same time, Mormons are not fundamentalist Christians.
No, I know.
And there are some really very good Mormon paleontologists who study, standard dinosaur science.
Really? Either?
Oh, yeah. So, and what happened, it's not surprising that a dinosaur paleontologist and artist would become interested in religion and atheism and so on.
I guess, right, okay.
Well, Thomas Huxley, who coined the term agnostic.
Yeah, that's right.
Paleontologist, evolutionary scientist. Richard Dawkins, evolutionary scientist. Stephen Jay Gould.
That's right.
There's a fellow Chardin, I believe, is a French paleontologist.
Chardin.
Yeah,
he's one of my heroes. He was beautiful. Yeah.
So it's very common.
Yeah,
so it's, people are kind of saying, you study dinosaurs, how to get into religion. It's almost natural. But there's a specific reason. And, of course, paleontologists, evolutionary scientists have to deal with creationism in this country.
Yes, okay, sure enough.
So that's an issue we have to look at a lot. And creationists are like most theists in general, and they're making a claim. And this is a huge claim. Well, they're making a whole bunch of claims.
Yes.
They're making the claim that there's a God that created the universe.
Yeah, that's a biggie. That's been a biggie, yeah.
Monotheists in particular. Yeah. Although that's actually not the biggest question we need to look at in a way, and I'll try to get into that later on. But another thing they're positing, and this is even more important, is that this God is really good. That you have to run societies based on the dictates of this God, because this is the God that provides absolute morality, right?
Absolutism is part of their creed,
Christian doctrine is that God is perfect in all respects, including morality.
Yeah.
And if you're going to run a moral society and run it well, you've got to believe in this God, worship this God, or you're going to go to hell in a handcart. It's a basic tenet.
Well, we did have a big breakdown when with Galileo and so forth there, when they thought we were the center of the universe. And then there was a terrible wrenching to their identity when they began to realize that that was not the case. It played hell, Hieronymus Bosch. Their identity wrapped up in an absolutist idea that can answer the question of a self-reflective consciousness, what's it all about and how did all this happen, unlike most of the creatures of the biological realm.
But actually, I'm not really kind of looking at those questions. I'm looking at more important practical questions about running societies. And now, there are different forms of what I call the moral creator socioeconomic hypothesis.
The moral
creator socioeconomic hypothesis. And I particularly published on this in the online journal Evolutionary Psychology. It's an online article, put in Evolutionary Psychology, Grergory Paul, you can get it. And also previously in the Journal of Religion Society, it's also an online journal, but the Evolutionary Psychology article is the most recent, posted in 2009, is the most detailed. And there's also different kinds of this hypothesis. The creationists say that you have to be a fundamentalist, believe in the Bible, believe the earth is just a few thousand years old, take the Bible literally. But even liberal theists are often still saying God is really important to running societies. Even if you're talking about much more liberal manner, non-literalist. Yes, you can believe the earth is really old, 4.5 billion years old, and that maybe Jesus didn't say everything he said in the Bible and so on. But there's still, this is a very common, widespread argument. It's the position of the Republican Party. Barack Obama seems to be advocating it too, to a fair extent. So it's very common. In this country in particular, people talk about God all the time.
Right. So
the problem that's going on over the years is that the creationists are saying that if societies reject creationism and accept evolution and reject God, that they're going to be in terrible trouble. But that's not just them. Again, liberal theists say that, the Catholic Church says this, it's across the spectrum. So, I mean, there are a few liberal Christians who won't say that. There are some, and a few other liberal theists, but this is a very common thing. The problem was, nobody was backing it up.
Think
about it. When did you ever see a study somewhere that came out showing, here's why, if you look at different nations, the ones that are most religious are doing the best. In basic, just basic factors of lifespans, teen pregnancy rates, murder rates, and we'll get more into that later on. How many studies like that have you seen showing that religion is superior? They don't exist.
Why?
Because nobody did them. And think about it, there's all these right-wing think tanks out there. You would think that they would be churning this stuff out all the time. And there are plenty of conservative, academics at universities, and they weren't doing it either. But there's another thing that really ticked me off. The atheists weren't doing it either. They'd complain about this. And they're talking about, well, you can be an atheist, and you can be as moral as a theist, and you can run an atheistic society, but they weren't doing the science either. So around the turn...
Again, why, do you think?
I'm not really entirely sure about this. So around the turn of the century, I said, I got tired of this. I'm going to look into this. So what I decided to do is look at factors of religiosity, which there are a bunch of, and socioeconomic factors, and just start plotting them up and see what happens. And the initial...
around 2000 you're talking about.
Yeah, something like... It was actually 2001.
You'd been involved in making real anatomically correct depictions of dinosaurs that are works of art.
Yeah.
You've been involved in that. But
Since the late 70s, yeah.
Yeah, right. Okay, yeah, really good. I congratulate you on that. We shouldn't let that go, you know, because that's a major paleontological contribution.
Yeah.
And artistic.
I'm also about to split Tyrannosaurus into multiple species. Tyrannosaurus rex is not
really?
It's not going to be Rex that much anymore. Just one specimen can we actually say belongs to Rex, but that's a whole other subject.
Yeah, okay.
So anyway.
Yeah, but, okay, so you got off on this other thing.
So what happened is I did some initial plots, and I found them so amazing and shocking that I said, there must have been sociologists who've done this, because it's just so obvious. And then I started checking, I started calling them up and looking more, and they hadn't. And then one sociologist even said, I should have thought of this. So I started doing it. And it's a really amazing results. And this is starting to get out to the public somewhat. It's not as much as it should have been. I have been told by some sociologists I've had more impact on this than anybody else.
Really?
And by the way, you're asking about my education. I have a high school diploma.
Okay.
That's all I ever had. I studied.
You got all the way through high school. Good for you.
Yeah. I studied informally at Hopkins under Robert Bacher, who's a pretty famous dinosaur paleontologist. He kind of revolutionized the field. He was the one who really advocated that dinosaurs have high metabolic rates and stuff like that. And one of the people showing that birds are direct descendants of dinosaurs and that sort of thing. Birds are flying dinosaurs. But I never got a degree there for various reasons.
Archaeopteryx or something?
Archaeopteryx is a dinosaur, but so is a crow or a pigeon. They're all dinosaurs, literally. Like bats are flying mammals.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it's really cool. And this came out in the 70s when I was just starting to get into it. It was just really, a breakthrough science, and it was really...
Do you think it was your later years in high school that made you so erudite, or you could have gotten along with fifth grade education? I'm making a joke in a sense, you know. What I'm saying is the self-directed person who's really involved in what they want to do is the main thing for education.
Partly why I'm involved in this, because
you might have done well to avoid higher education with all this
specialization. Because academics, they may be leery of getting involved in some of this stuff, the controversy that comes along with it.
True.
And I think that is partial, and I've talked to some people about this, and I know sociology students have kind of gotten into trouble trying to get into this of late. Although it's starting to break down, and there's now Phil Zuckerman, who I've collaborated with a bit at Pfizer. He's set up a Center for Secular Studies. There are plenty of studies of religion, university. This is the first group especially to deal with secularism.
Seems like secularism's on the march. It's just growing.
Yes, and this is the other important thing.
Yeah.
One of the important things that my results is confirming is that religion is, some people are still arguing, some foolish people still say this, they're idiots. They will say that religion is universal like language. And I've seen this in the pages of Science and Nature still recently, which is absurd. Every competent person has fantastic language skills, even, tribal peoples, very high language skills. And almost everybody's a materialist. We all want stuff. Even people who are running the little tribal, that's why we have thumbs for. So these are things that are genetically programmed to a greater or lesser degree. We have vocal cords that work for language and that sort of thing. So these are all consistently high in all societies, the materialism and language. But the odds of people, and I learned this reading National Geographic about 3 years ago. I had no idea about this, and then I saw it. I immediately checked it in the anthropological literature. The Hodza hunter-gatherers, who pretty much the last hunter-gatherers were actually still living that lifestyle.
The what of hunter-gatherer?
The Hadza.
Hadza, was that a group?
Hadza, a group of East Africans
who
still live like people did 20,000 years ago.
Oh, really? Okay, I didn't know.
And they have virtually no religiosity. They don't bury the dead. They don't believe in an afterlife. They don't have hunting rituals. They do kind of think the sun is a god, but they don't worship it. It comes up every day and sets, and they don't worry about it. Much less religiosity than other hunter-gatherers who are much more intense in that. So we can't assume that our ancestors are highly religious like we've been assuming. The Chinese civilization, much less religious than, say, the Indian or Christian European. What's the name of the great Chinese god? There is none. They've always been more philosophical.
Right.
So they have
a
tremendous variation in religiosity, unlike language and materialism.
But I wonder if I could, do you think there's something unique about the human consciousness? I guess we come out of Homo habilis, a couple 100,000 years ago. Our
more
species.
like Homo erectus through habilis. Homo erectus is probably our most recent ancestor.
You think so?
Yeah, habilis was earlier.
Okay, interesting. Okay, but We did have a unique capability, it seems to me, to be able to, we had a self-reflective consciousness that gave us the ability to ask some of the larger issues, what's it all about, kind of philosophical.
Yeah, what I'm just talking about is the level of universality of religion.
Okay.
This is a very common argument.
Or the common argument.
That humans are almost compelled to be religious.
Right, okay, yeah. It's like hardwired or something, yeah.
Now, a theist is a person who can state that they believe in God to a greater or lesser degree. Atheism is merely the absence of theism. So agnostic is not between atheist and theist. It's actually brackets both, as according to Huxley's, the way he coined the term.
Thomas Huxley?
Thomas Huxley.
Yeah, he was something else.
Yeah.
The Huxley family was amazing, yeah.
So we know that we're getting good survey data in. The Danes are predominantly atheists now. They will, if you survey them, a minority now say will commit to believing in God.
As to atheism as opposed to agnostic.
This is atheism for marginal atheists. You know, theists are diverse. They're from marginal theists to truly dedicated. Atheists are very diverse too. You can have very committed. The most hardcore atheist I would think I know of is Ayn Rand, who just totally said there's no God.
Yeah.
Even I don't do that. I'm like Dawkins. You can not totally disprove it. You can't disprove ghosts either, but it's incredibly unlikely. But
and yet it's interesting, those God kind of things are often to get some sort of an absolutist something more than the chaos of reality as we perceive it. If you understand what I'm saying, that's what they're trying to do, is get some absolutist higher order of thing in order to make some sense out of a chaotic world.
Well, what I'm looking at is they're also trying to say that societies are going to be chaotic if you don't believe in God.
Okay,
but
it got political implications,
The Canadians are much less religious than they are. We are. Australians are. Japanese much less religious.
All these advanced nations. Right?
We're the of the top 18 most prosperous first world democracies. We're the most religious.
Is that a fact? Yeah, that's
we have 20% of our population can classify as atheist.
How can we account for that, I wonder?
Well, I'll get it to that.
Yeah, please. I'm sure that's what you're interested in. Yeah.
So if atheism is terrible for societies, then why are these other nations not crumbling away? Why are they not chaotic? Well, what I did in these studies is and another thing that was not done prior to my doing this is nobody had done a really comprehensive comparison of socioeconomic conditions in the top 18 prosperous democracies. It's never been done. You know, the UN never did it. So in the evolutionary psychology article, and I'm also expanding it, I did 24 indicators, and I'm doubling that now. And you got homicide, incarceration rates, teen pregnancy, abortion rates, lifespans, juvenile mortality, which is incredibly important, income disparity, how many hours people work, resource exploitation. It's a whole bunch of things to just measure basic the comparison to the conditions of countries and how relatively successful they are.
Right.
And I totaled everything up on a 0 to 10 scale for each nation, 0 being the worst among first world nations and 10 the best. And the United States, we have sky-high homicide rates, like no other first world nation.
Imprisonment, too.
Yeah, horrendous. We have more people in prison than all of China.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah.
We have the worst juvenile mortality, the shortest lifespans now, highest teen pregnancy rates, highest abortion rates, highest mental illness rates. Some STDs were the highest.
And the highest rates of religiosity.
Yeah, we have high divorce rates. We have we're the most troubled, most dysfunctional country. And
of the developed country.
Yeah, on the 0 to 10 scale, we score around a 3. And what happens is if you correlate religiosity measured by basic indicators of church, do you believe in God or not, or you're an atheist, or do you believe in the Bible to be taken literally, church attendance, and rates of prayer, and that sort of thing. I did a 0 to 10 scale for that. When you correlate it, it's a beautiful, the Pearson R correlation is 0.6 or something like that, which
Pearson
is really
error?
high.
I don't know.
Pearson R correlation is a standard way of graphically correlating things to see if there's
across the board in all kinds
of... A perfectly straight line would be a 1.
Okay.
And no relationship would be 0.0. And getting around 0.6 or something like that, which is really good for sociological. That's really high.
Yeah, that's important. That's a way of taking data pattern recognition.
Yeah, and nobody had done this before. And this shows that what the theists have been saying, the greater the moral creator's socioeconomic hypothesis is not only wrong, it's reverse. And I've come up with what I call the democratic secular socioeconomic hypothesis, which says that the more atheistic democratic societies are, the better off they are.
And can you find a correlation according to where you said
it's absolutely there.
That's very interesting, isn't
and there have been
it?
some
That's really
studies done
interesting.
since that are starting to confirm this. And nobody's come up with a counter argument. So the question is, why does this pattern exist?
Right.
Now, I already pointed out that religion is not universal. This is incredibly important. This means there's, people are still talking about God genes, that we may have a genetic.
Yeah, right.
No way.
Yeah.
If religion can fall away so rapidly, and it's been happening in Europe for quite a while now, that religion is really collapsing. It is in the United States too. According to Gallup, when they asked the basic question, do you believe in God? If you don't, do you believe in a universal spirit? And if you don't, do you not believe in either? The number who say none of this is quadrupled since the 60s.
Is that a fact?
Yeah, there's some new surveys coming out showing.
That's what I said, it's on the march, it seems.
Yeah, and it's showing the extraordinary growth rate of atheism, particularly among young people. And we're talking about maybe adding 10 to 15 million atheists in this country every decade or more, maybe even higher than that. It's just religion may be starting to collapse in this country like it has in some of the other Western democracies. So why is this happening? That's the big question.
Why is it collapsing?
Why is it collapsing? And also,
how about
why
the
is
advance of objective understanding and education?
I've come up with what I call the triple threat to Western religion.
Okay.
And one of them is modern science and technology.
Yeah.
Obviously, that if science had, for example, shown, the Earth is just a few thousand years old, and the universe is just a few thousand light years across, and animals aren't related to each other, and they all appear with the false rock at the same time, we'd all be theists.
Yeah.
We'd all be for God.
Right.
And I cannot believe people still say science can't test these questions, whether God, and it's a very common thing that a lot of scientists will say, that science has nothing to do with religion. Of course, science can test lots of religious claims, including if, like I just said, if the Earth was really just a few thousand years old and scientists show that, would show that there's a God. So you can use science for all sorts of things in terms of religion. That's one of the things that's going on. But probably the most compelling thing is this, and that is that since religion isn't universal, it's dependent upon the environment. Something in the human environment causes different rates of religiosity. And religion is only present in nations that are sufficiently dysfunctional. There's something wrong with them. And this is not a radical. This is not a radical concept. I mean, we kind of all know that people tend to turn to religion when things are bad, right? So basically, believing in the gods is a psychological coping mechanism for dealing with high levels of anxiety due to trouble in one's life. And this can be the basic habitat.
No, I can see how you can see that. Yeah, right.
And this is often true in second and third world nations where conditions are just bad generally. So what people are really doing is, there is a mistake many people make. Many people think that people are religious because they fear death.
Well, there is that question.
That is going on to a certain extent. But the Hadza, these tribal peoples, they don't believe in an afterlife. Most French don't, and Danes don't believe in an afterlife anymore. So that's not really the critical thing. Basically, it's people are, when their daily lives, and that's the important thing, are sufficiently dysfunctional, they look to the gods for aid and protection, to help them out. And that's what's going on in the United States. Now, I'm going to turn to the rest of the first world. In the rest of the first world, you have universal health care.
You have what?
Universal health care.
Okay, yeah.
You're never going to go bankrupt because you can't get access to health.
You sure as hell are going to do it in this country.
We'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah.
Now, not only that, but this provides superior overall service. So they have all longer lifespans, and they're not killing off the kids as fast as we are in this country. We're killing off our kids faster than any other first world democracy. It's an outrage. In fact, it was that first plot. You plot up juvenile mortality. It's a beautiful correlation with the amount of religiosity. I couldn't believe this. Nobody had ever plotted that up. It was a shocking thing. They also have better worker rights one way or another. Either their jobs are better protected, they're more unionized, or if they're fired, they have better government support until they get their next job. They have a better education system for lower income. In the United States, we have among the worst upward social mobility of any first world nation now.
Yeah,
which
and
is stunning. These conservatives are going
you've
around.
been able to correlate all these different
Yeah.
things. That's really important work.
Well, this is actually
yeah.
becoming pretty well known, that the social mobility, there's been a lot of talk about this. The conservative claim is that we need low taxes and let things just, the free market do what it wants to allow people to get up the income ladder. That's the opposite of what's actually happening. So
this is a broad critique you've got of the whole society. Yeah, I can see,
So what's going on is, if you're living in Canada or France or Sweden, England or Australia, come Sunday, what are you going to do? You're going to go to church and seek, petition to God for aid in helping your daily life? You don't need it. What's the point of that? They go for a hike instead. And this has caused church attendance to crash, and that really disrupts the propaganda system. Plus, when you put in government assistance, including health care and other things, that really goes after the religious charities, that really degrades them, and that's a major outreach. So these things have contributed to the collapse of religion in the Western world. In the United States, you could be doing pretty good. You could have your McMansion, your SUVs, your fancy vacations and all that, great job, you get laid off. You then lose your health insurance, somebody comes down with cancer. You're bankrupt before you know it. This happens to a few million people every year. I think it's 1 million or 2 million.
Horrible. The millions were foreclosed.
Yeah, it's very common.
Yeah.
And there's this rat race to get ahead, because you need the money to survive in this country to prevent disasters like that from happening.
Right.
You have a lot less government support. And of course, the religious right tends to be against these things, the progressive systems that work in the rest of the world. So we have much more of a rat race. It's much higher insecurity levels, more intense competition. We have higher income disparity, which in of itself may contribute to health problems.
And you see a correlation with those things, those negative things,
Yeah,
with
here's
the
the thing.
the high religious identification with this country.
Well, this is really cool.
Yeah.
I pointed out the 0 to 10 scale for socioeconomic conditions. In terms of religiosity, the United States is both most religious and the worst off in socioeconomic conditions. This plots beautifully also with income disparity. And the income disparity is a basic measure of progressive versus libertarian economics.
Sure would seem that way to me, yeah.
And
What do
the
you
United
find?
States has the most income disparity, and we have the most social dysfunction.
Again, among the developed countries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
About the 18 or 19 most prosperous democracies.
Okay, yeah.
And this also works with income disparity in religion. The lower income disparity is, the more atheistic it is. So these are all interacting. These are all factors. The poor performance of economics boosts religion, and it's sometimes hard to keep these things going together.
Yeah.
They're all interrelated. So basically, this is what it really comes down to. The only way to successfully run a society, and I should actually come back and talk to you about this, because I am doing a bigger paper on this, exclusively look at libertarianism versus progressivism in economics and what works the best.
Okay.
This is what I'm developing these 48 indicators for. Then I'm going to go on to religion.
You're developing a what?
I actually should have mentioned this earlier. I call this comparison the successful society scale.
Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah. Okay.
In the evolutionary psychology, it's 24 indicators. I'm boosting it to 48. I'm throwing everything into this thing, every factor I can get to get as comprehensive as possible.
And this is just a pattern that you're going to set, or a template you can do to study the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what we now know is no two ways about it. Basically, progressive hybrid economies that combine capitalism and socialism are working the best in the first world. They're the ones that get the longest lifespans and the lowest juvenile mortality rates, lowest murder rates, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Almost across the board, they tend to do better.
UN has a thing, the human index, or the human benefit.
You cannot use that. They are abandoning it. It is too limited. It
Really?
only allows gross comparisons between first, second, and third world nations.
Is there a possibility we could ever get to something more universal, like Cervantes had a thing. He said there's only two classes in the world, haves and have-nots. And what do we mean by that? And is ever get at some sort of a measurement of the people that are haves, and by what criteria would we get to it, as opposed to have-nots as a meaningful indicator of things sociological or economic development on the planet? Haves and have-nots. What does it mean to be a have? What does it mean to be a have-not?
Well, what
and what are the relations between those who
I'm being
resort?
pretty conventional here. I'm going with standard ways that people define success today. And I
Okay,
try not to be
success.
controversial. I'm doing being controversial enough. I'm just sticking to the basics of lifespans, and divorce
be-
rates, mental illness.
But a number of
income
those
levels.
lifespan issues and those kind of things, illiteracy, this kind of thing, and all those things, would come out to be something that in a pattern way could see the person as a have. We talk about haves and
Yeah.
have-nots socioeconomically.
But I'm
interested
already looking at the countries where most people are haves. as it is.
You're okay,
I'm just looking at the
Maybe it's a different issue. Yeah, it's different. Yeah.
So basically, only economically progressive hybrid economies that you have in Northern Europe, Canada, Australia, Japan, New Zealand, those are the ones that work the best. That's what
Okay.
the evidence shows. There's just no two ways about it. And this great debate we still have in this country is ridiculous. And you don't see this debate really in the rest of the West.
Yeah.
Everybody, other Westerners don't envy the Americans anymore.
So if they're not using the UN index of what is it called? The
They're
Human Index
expanding it, they're modifying it, they're putting it in income disparity.
Is that still a thing that is
You can go look it up on
referred to and then it's being modified and everything?
It's on Wikipedia. They actually discuss how they're abandoning the old.
Is there a
one.
better model other than that?
Yeah, the successful society scale. That's
And
it.
that's the successful society
That's what I've
scale.
come
Is
up
that
with.
what you've come up
Yes,
with?
that's
The one
the-
you've come up with, you
Yes,
think
it's
is
much-
better,
vastly
much better.
There's
and
no comparison. It's
Okay, good.
Vastly larger and broader.
Congratulations. That's a very
It's
important.
inexcusable that the UN hasn't done this before. That hasn't done something.
Oh, okay.
So, progressive societies, democracies work the best.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is that when you run a nation well, religion always collapses because people.
When
lose-
you're, I'm sorry.
when you run a nation well,
When you run a nation well, sorry, I didn't get the words. Yeah, good. Yeah,
as the progressive democracies are doing,
yeah.
people automatically and always consistently, the majority lose interest in God. When the middle class feels secure and prosperous and they're not going to go bankrupt or whatever because of medical bills, etc. This has always happened. There's been no reversals of this pattern. What this means, let's think about this.
Material success will be the death of God.
This means that that you cannot run a nation well and have it be highly religious at the same time. It has never happened. Empirically, it's not possible. It hasn't happened. In theory, when you figure out why this is happening, it is literally impossible. So we have to reverse it. The moral creator socioeconomic hypothesis that you need a God, people have to believe in God or the society is going to be in terrible trouble is not only not true, but it's not even comparable.
reverse.
It's not just that atheist societies, atheist democracies run as well as the religious democracies. Only the atheist democracy can really run well.
It turns everything on its
I
ear,
want to
right?
emphasize something about
Yeah.
this because atheism needs a reform too in a particular way, and I'm going to use Bill Maher to illustrate this.
Yeah.
He's probably the best known atheist in the United States because he has his own show and he did his that religious, that documentary.
Religiosity, yeah.
And he's doing something fairly common, and Hitchens said this, religion poisons everything. And at the end of Religious, Bill Maher said, he at the end was saying that if religion continues, there's going to be an apocalypse, that religion is the thing that causes these problems.
It's so absolutist and my God's better than your God kind of thing, that gets nations fighting, yeah.
Also, after the Norwegian shooter,
Yeah. Wasn't it
on his
awful?
show, he said that this is the religion is behind this, religion is causing the problems. And I think her name is Margaret Hoover. She's a young woman who's a direct descendant of President Hoover. She's a moderate conservative.
Yeah,
She's not totally
yeah,
outlandish.
she's been in the news, yeah.
Yeah. She was on, and all she said was Stalin, Pol Pot, and Mao. And Bill Maher didn't have a reply to this. And where Bill Maher had made a mistake is that both atheism and religion can go to depravity. They're both morally neutral, really. But only atheism can achieve the highest socioeconomic success. So that's what I call the atheist advantage. Both theism and atheism can go bad, but only atheism can be truly successful. And this is something that hasn't gotten out there yet. Now, there's another reason why religion is a bad idea. Maybe we want to switch to that because this is we're going to get into theology now. We're talking sociology and so on. And by the way, I had no idea when I started doing this that I'd get into this sort of thing.
Boy, yeah.
I had no idea. I was just going to try to refute the creationists and the theists about religion is great for societies because I kind of knew that wasn't true because obviously the Swedes are doing pretty good and they're highly atheistic and that sort of thing. I had no idea I'd be getting into questions of why religion exists, of why that it's not because of fear of death and that sort of thing. It's not because of a God gene. It's basically because of high anxiety levels under dysfunctional conditions.
Well, that's the basic premise, yeah, right,
Yeah.
like that, yeah. Also, James Joyce had Daedalus say, history is a nightmare of injustice from which we're attempting to awaken. We haven't awakened to a new way of being, of well-being. It's been material insecurity throughout almost all of human history for most all of human society.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is Phil Zuckerman, a colleague of mine, he went to Denmark and he interviewed lots of Danes about how they feel. And they have a very secure, prosperous democracy, very low rates of religiosity, high, and they're very indifferent to spirituality and God over there now. A couple people he asked.
That's what I understand, Denmark, yeah.
Yeah,
right,
when he asked, at least 2 Danes, when he asked them, do you believe in God or not, they said, I don't know if I ever really thought of that. I mean, that's how casual it's been.
Yeah, right.
But anyway, there's a real core problem that's also contributing to why religion doesn't work. And that's the very, very basis of what God is. And people debate on and on and on about does God exist or not, but we can't fully test that. You can always come up with, there's always the possibility that there is some sort of God that you can't entirely disprove. I mean, you can't entirely disprove ghosts or whatever. I don't want to get really into this.
No, but there is a distrust in the scientific community to the degree in which the scientific process has been able to establish itself and everything, to distrust, particularly when you see unintended consequences, like in physics and so forth, or synergy, the behavior system more than the sum of the parts. There's a tendency by intellectual processes to distrust anything absolutist, because things are altering so very, very rapidly.
We're going to get into absolutism in a minute. I'm going to make an absolute
I mean, the religion is an overarching,
I'm going to make an absolute statement
thing
about God that is absolutely true. Because absolutism is okay, too. Here's
it
absolutism.
is, okay.
Here,
okay,
I'm going to say an absolute statement. The Earth is a sphere orbiting the sun. And if you want to disagree with me,
within the criteria, but absolutist in the ultimate sense of ontology or reality and so forth.
But there are some things that we can come to conclusions on, and we cannot entirely
there's some generalized principles,
We can't entirely refute the existence of a creator of this universe. But that's not really the central. A lot of times when people have this debate, it's kind of like, particularly theists, if they figure if they kind of won that argument, now everything follows, that God is perfect and all that. But that's not the key question. People don't really care about the existence or non-existence of a God. What they want is a good God.
Because that's interesting. Yeah, you said that at the outset. Yeah, right.
If there's
something that can be having some sort of hope for a good God that is so in contradistinction to the terrible material reality.
Well, what's the point of a God that's either amoral or immoral?
Right.
Who wants that?
Yeah. How about if we get to a world that's materially beneficial, then the need for that will go away.
Well,
the need for the God.
Been happening.
Yeah, right. That's essentially what's happening, perhaps, if humanity is improving and if the evolutionary process.
There's another way to get that to happen, and that is to show why God is. There's no way God is good. It can't be good. And this is something that has not been properly addressed yet. And I started to address it I published a paper, and I pointed out earlier, I published in the Journal of Religion and Society, the first paper I did on sociology.
Okay.
I get these papers into religious journals to help legitimize them. And these are technical peer-reviewed papers.
Okay.
Which is also very important. And other people, even leading atheists, haven't been really doing these kind of peer-reviewed studies. In Philosophy and Theology in 2009, I published the first absolute disproof of a good God.
Of a good God,
yes.
Okay, yeah.
Now, and I'm going to actually do something here. I'm going to ask the people in the audience to ask themselves this. Is there any good reason to commit mass homicide on children, to kill a lot of them off under circumstances that you could stop this from happening? What are those circumstances? And I've never had anybody say, oh, here's when you can do that. I think everybody agrees that that's just wrong, okay? And I don't want to get into a long
No, I understand. Yeah,
I'm setting something up here.
Yeah. I
So
can see,
everybody would agree that this is wrong, and also deny the free will of children if they have free will.
Another issue,
assuming whether people, I'm going to assume that the adults have free will for the sake of this discussion. It's a whole other issue, but we're going to do that. So anyway, and another thing I ask people is how many people have been born. And hardly anybody knows this.
100 billion?
Yes.
I think it's about 100 billion have existed. It's best our estimate.
Yeah, there have been demographic studies that show this. It really adds up. It's a huge number. Some people think it's as low as 10 billion. In fact, I even talked to leading atheists about this, and they're kind of shocked when they hear this. What nobody calculated was how many kids have died.
You mean child? Oh,
Yeah, nobody had ever calculated the
infant
number of children
mortality
who
or
died.
something. Yeah.
And that's
They keep records of that now, but I mean, even over the long haul, you mean?
yeah, just basically. And
do we come to agreement when we appeared in evolution?
it doesn't really. It doesn't really.
Ago?
Those things are peripheral because the population wasn't large until agriculture came in.
That's true. 10,000 years ago. Yeah.
So there were studies done in India in the late 1800s by the British, and in Europe in the 1700s. Mortality rates, about half the children die.
Yeah, I know. It was horrible.
So that's
history is a nightmare of grinding injustice and poverty throughout almost all of the human experience. Certainly in the wandering and gathering stage, going around eating carrion. I don't think it was anything you'd want to live back in those times.
Well, what's the main defense that theologians have come up with? It's called theodicy, for why God allows bad things to happen. You have supposedly this perfect God, right? Mm-hmm. We have this fantastically imperfect world. And their basic argument is the free will hypothesis, which is that God allows bad things to happen because if God controlled everything to make everything really nice and safe, humans wouldn't have free will. He can be controlling everything. And God obviously doesn't want automata or robotic people who just pop up in heaven and worship Him for eternity. He wants us to have a free will choice. This is the basic free will hypothesis. It goes way back.
Yeah.
Most of the leading theologians go for this. And I actually had this happen. On Christmas, I went down to some relatives of mine, and we were playing sort of a gift game at one point. And people were having to choose gifts in this kind of game. And one of my relatives said, "God gave you free will. Make a choice." this is, if you ask Sarah Palin, this is what she'll say. Any conservative, the Pope will say this. This is very common. But there's a problem here.
I would say so, yeah.
Half the children have died as kids. 2-year-olds don't have free will.
Yeah.
They can't sign contracts. They can't make a controlled choice.
Right,
it's even worse than that for multiple reasons. First, this planet has been packed full of diseases. So if a God created the universe, it allowed this planet to this universe is not fine-tuned for human life. It's a death trap, packed full of diseases. Kids have inadequate immune systems. So if a God created humanity, He left kids with inadequate immune systems. And also the reproductive system is pretty lousy too, so most conceptions probably fail to come to term. So if you have 100 billion births, you're talking about 200 to maybe 400 billion conceptions. So one way or another, at least half and perhaps most of humanity is being denied free will.
Okay.
This means there's no way that there's a God that gives a damn about human life.
Okay.
This God has in fact committed either negligent or premeditated homicide against children. This is not a moral God.
Or you could carry it out into a wide extent, because I think it's something like 99.9% of all species that have ever existed have gone extinct, so he didn't have a very good attitude or democratic attitude toward the great variety of democratic expression. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. Now,
it's red in tooth and claw.
Yeah. So God has allowed, one way or another, the denial of free will and life and safety and security to most of humanity.
What kind of a God is that?
Well, it's not just that. This wrecks the free will hypothesis.
Yeah, okay, I see. Right,
he's not giving us free will. It's all a lie.
Yeah, right.
It's a total, complete lie. And theologians and theists and ministers, clerics, lay Christians bring up this free will argument. It is a total lie.
Is it a...
Now, what I did was...
It's got political implications and crowd control and that kind of thing. It's like Goebbels or something. Goebbels is going too far. But it's got political implications in terms of keeping people under the sway of a particular political leader, doesn't it?
Well, one of the ways I'm hoping that this will, when this word gets out, that this will help accelerate the secularization of societies. Because how many people know that 50 billion kids have died? Hardly anybody. I was the first to publish on this just a few years ago. Now, what
you mean died in infancy or something? Is that what you...
50% of those born have died around before age 7 or 10 or something.
Infant mortality.
Infant mortality rate is about a third historically.
Yeah.
Plus you have all the preborn who've died spontaneously. They either don't implant because of genetic defects and all that.
Okay.
Well, what I did when I did the paper is I didn't just point this out. I also looked through all the major publications on theodicy to see what they said about the children of free will.
On theosophy?
Theodicy.
Theodicy.
That is the defense of the existence of a good God within a perfect world.
Oh, I see.
That's the term for that.
There was the Theosophical Society. That's something else.
No,
okay.
that's different.
Yeah, it's Alice Bailey or something. Go.
So,
And there's spiritualist things too. There's spiritual things outside of religiosity,
Yeah.
but that's another issue.
but I'm not really addressing that. Yeah.
Okay.
So, in the paper, I point out that theologians, theodists, they just don't mention the kids. They don't bring it up.
Just don't bring it up.
You were mentioning animals earlier. Some of these books have subchapters on the suffering of animals. In the index, Suffering of Animals, they have subchapters talking about how animals suffer, and it's okay, that this is okay with a good
But
God.
not suffer the little children.
Why? Because I think what happens
It's
is
too embarrassing.
they would get to it and say, wait a second,
Yeah.
if a kid dies, they don't have free will. That just wrecks the whole thing.
Uh-huh.
And what I then did is I sent a PDF of this paper to all the leading theologians.
Uh-huh.
I even sent it to Francis Crick, who's, of course, a very famous
Crick,
theist.
Watson and Crick, yeah.
No, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No, Francis Collins.
Collins.
Francis
sorry.
Collins.
Yeah.
He was the head of the who's the head of the Genome Project. He's a very
Yeah.
well-known,
Right.
kind of moderate, but very strongly theist. He's debated Bill Maher in
Yeah.
certain sets. And that sort of-
Right.
And I sent it to these theologians, and not one of them responded, either privately or in the literature yet. And I'm pretty sure it's because they don't know how to reply. But what is happening is I think they're starting to abandon the free will hypothesis.
Have you sent that kind of thing to them on other issues that they did reply to, or is it just across the boards that they, I'm just curious.
I think I sent it. That came out at the same time as
Have
everyone.
you come out in a counterblast or thing like that would make you well known to them, and have you been in communication?
Some of them
and
must have known who I
challenging?
was.
Yeah.
Now, by the way, this paper, the philosophy and theology paper, you can access a PDF at my website, which is being posted. It's not an online journal.
Mm-hmm.
But there's been no response from these people.
Okay.
They do seem to be abandoning the free will argument. I think they're kind of realizing that they can't have that.
That is a biggie, yeah.
Yeah, it's basically what they have.
Yeah, right.
Now,
Uh-huh.
one of the theologians who was arguing for free will is a fellow named John Hott, who's at Washington, D.C. I sent it to him. I'd been in communication with him a little bit before. I've never heard from him since.
Mm-hmm.
And I did notice he's starting to talk about God gives us the gift of being. That's his gift to us.
Mm.
And he's slaughtering off half the kids,
Yeah.
which is a form of homicide.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Alvin Plantinga, who was big on the free will hypothesis, he published a book where he said, basically, who are we to challenge God on this?
Mm.
And that's moral depravity. And in
Yeah,
fact, this is
it
one of
does
the arguments
seem-
I'm going to make. Leading atheists are starting to point this out now. The argument up till now has been that atheism and theism, maybe it's okay to be an atheist or a theist. But
But
we're
where are
starting
our
to,
ethics going to come from? Where are moral principles and all that?
what I could do,
Yeah.
before we get to that,
Yeah.
what I'm trying to show, but some leading atheists are now starting to, like Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, P.Z. Myers, and so on, and others, is that, in fact, atheism is morally superior. And the reason is because theism is so morally defective. And basically,
What is so defective?
theism,
Okay,
particularly
sorry, I missed
monotheism,
the word,
where you're
yeah.
arguing
Yeah.
there's creator. Because what are you doing?
God is so defective.
You're worshiping a God that's committed. And remember earlier I asked,
Yeah,
what's the proper circumstances to kill off children in the mosque? There is none. It's homicide.
Uh-huh.
So if you're a Christian, for example, what are you doing? For reasons of self-aggrandizement, you're kissing the ass of a God, saying, send me favors and boons, both here on earth and particularly in an afterlife.
Well, I can't
and
help-
I'm not going to worry that
yeah.
you killed off 50 billion kids.
Yeah,
that
I
you
can't
torture
help.
these children to death.
I can't help thinking it is a reflective conscience being able to do it, and the means of political manipulation and political control come into my mind as a way of
But here's a great thing. Religion is very weak. Look what's happened in Europe. The Catholic Church is collapsing in Europe.
yeah.
And I'm not going to be talking about it here, but I've done research on how incredibly criminal the Catholic Church is. It's been involved, not the pedophile scandal is the tip of the
all
iceberg.
the pedophile stuff. Yeah.
But it's much worse than that. They've been involved with criminal elements for a long time. This is well documented in newspaper
Can you
articles.
imagine taking a youthful person as spiritual and using these spiritual claims in order to violate them?
Yeah.
Or something? It's just unconscionable.
The Catholic Church has been up to even worse stuff in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But despite they have huge resources, they have a tremendous income flow. They try to deny it, but they do.
The Vatican.
And how effective they have been able. The forces. Another factor, by the way, that's involved in secularizing societies is the modern corporate consumer society. Because what are the corporations pushing? They're pushing materialism. They want us to buy stuff. They don't want us to be pious churchgoers.
No.
They want us to go to Walmart on a Sunday morning or Home Depot. Go to and I've actually taken a picture at a Walmart, so I'm going to use someday of a Walmart
bargain day?
at 10:30. I took it at 10:30 on a Sunday morning. It's packed. These people are not going to church.
Yeah.
And church attendance is really collapsing in this country. It's down to about a quarter to a fifth of the population on a regular Sunday. And there have been studies showing that it was the retail chains and also local retailers who really got rid of the blue laws that limited retail on Sunday. And they don't. The corporations generally, there are some exceptions, but they generally want people to be materialists, not pious people who are seeking salvation.
Yeah. No.
So this is a powerful force. So
right.
It's basically modernity. You combine science and technology, and digital social technologies are also de-churching people, young people particularly.
And the religious people will claim those are all materialistic values that the atheists proclaim. The religious people, you're not lending any support to the spirituality.
There's this bizarre conspiracy.
Yeah, I know, it's amazing.
It's the Fox News effect, where you have on Fox News, they're saying, oh, it's horrible how the United States is secularizing and how the atheists are waging a war on Christmas, when the real war on Christmas is coming from the corporations. They just want people to buy stuff. And that goes back to the early 1800s. The night before Christmas was an attempt to get the growing middle class to start thinking of Christmas as a gift season, which was not true before then.
Yeah.
So
this is a broad-based kind of.
Rupert Murdoch is one of the best allies of atheism in this country and in the West, because of course he published all these tabloid magazines, but also Fox News, which promotes the corporate consumerism that is degrading religion, including his own entertainment empire, which puts on The Simpsons, which is a show that regularly attacks religion. And then he has Fox News, where his pundits complain about this.
Well, what about the general thing that there is mercy and some of these other things that are very human things that people in time of trial or difficulty that they can.
The Danes don't do this anymore.
The Danes don't. But I'm saying that these needs, or the needs of people, have been addressed, and also the question of their contribution to thou shalt, some of the core parts of ethics and so forth have come from the spiritual traditions, or if you go to Lao Tzu, or you go to some of the things like the larger spiritual issues, have had some positive contribution to the advancement of an advanced civilized society.
People are decent because that's how societies run, and religion has probably done overall more harm than good.
Religion and spirituality, or do you think you need some sort of a spiritual grounding or some religious grounding?
We seem to be seeing people in first world nations become irreligious and not terribly spiritual.
Yeah, but I'm not sure. Is that something necessarily good? Is that good that we don't have no moorings to ideas or ethics and so forth?
When Phil Zuckerman interviewed Danes, he would say, all that stuff I don't really care about. What's important is to live a good life, be good to people, and that sort of thing. Just common decency. That's what we need, is common decency. And it is indecent to worship. And I will charge Christians, and I am talking about some people about putting together a trial of God. Some atheists get them together.
You're going to put God in the dock?
Yeah, maybe even petition the international court about this. Of course, they won't take the case, but just to get the publicity out there. To get out that if God exists, he's committed homicide against 50 billion kids. To try to discredit that. So you're not getting morality from God.
Are you going to say that there's nothing good has ever come out of any of the religious or...
When did I say that?
No, I didn't. I said you're not saying that.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm saying is you have to look at the totality.
Because that, in a certain sense, atheism could be, in a certain sense, saying that there's nothing is absolutist. And the thing that modern scientific thinking, I think, is, in particular, the synergistic, they just got to figure out the physics of Einstein and quantum mechanics and so forth. And along comes Brian Greene, and he comes up with string theory. So that we don't even know whether the universe is a closed or open system in order for the second law of thermodynamics that is held. These are scientific principles we build on. We don't even know if it's an open or closed system if you got parallel universes. So the idea of absolutist is something that I think the intellectual community is very distrustful of.
But
atheism itself becomes an absolutist thing that says there is no, it doesn't. Or how do you deal with it?
No, I'm just saying absolute. What I'm absolutist is there's no good God. That's impossible.
God, you're talking God. Okay, yeah.
I'm not saying it's absolutely impossible for God to exist.
There is. Oh, okay, okay.
And this is the most important question.
Yeah.
The God question, whether it exists or not, is not the key question.
Or whether there's an absolutist anything. I mean, it seems to be, even evolution itself is, they discarded so much of it, and then we get down to where we may become, we got now weapon systems that can wipe out the whole species. That'd be an ultimate kind of expression of destructive capability, which is an extension of our consciousness.
There's something very important here.
Yeah.
Science has, within the last 150 years, saved billions of children from
They've also
death.
developed weapons that can wipe out and stop the
But we have
conscious
saved
evolution.
vastly more children than people have been killed in wars. The number of people killed in wars since modern technology is around 150 billion. I published a chapter in an Oxford handbook. His title is too long for me to remember.
Yeah.
It's on my website, where I talk about the issues of war and violence, and religion cannot solve those issues either, because religion is always associated with dysfunctional
What's
societies.
the etymology of the word? It means to hold, I think, religio.
Pardon?
Religio, the etymology.
I'm not really sure.
I think it means to hold, or to bind, or to co-hold.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
And it's the thing that people are dependent upon to get some sort of a thing.
But the Chinese never really got into it, and even some hunter-gatherers haven't, so we shouldn't exaggerate.
They do have spiritual traditions. It's interesting, the Communist Party is the religion of the communist system now. Even though,
yeah, but
and
the level of it varies a good deal.
Yeah.
And I don't know how atheistic and non-spiritual society can become, but obviously it's a lot less than many people have been assuming.
Anyway, it's a really, really interesting subject. It's got all kinds of implications and everything. You're doing the research on it. I don't know. I congratulate you on all that work, plus all the work you did earlier when you were, your paleontological work.
Which I still do.
Are you optimistic for the human prospect out of all of this, ethically or otherwise, or in terms of some notion of the ultimate?
I'm not interested in the human prospect.
Do you think there's any direction, there's any anti-anthropic function that evolution, apexed, if that's the case, by humanity might perform that is worthy of taking into account, particularly in a world where there is constant new appearing, or do you think we may be on the edge?
Soon.
Do you think we're coming to the end of the human experience?
Yes,
in a
because humans
sense?
will change into robotic systems pretty much.
You think so? Or
become cyber
Are you familiar with the transhumanist movement?
I wrote a book called Beyond Humanity in the mid-90s.
You did?
With the co-author Earl Cox.
And so that would be like a transhumanist kind of thing? Or
that consciousness is almost certainly part of the laws of physics, and we're running it on meat right now, but you can do alternative systems.
And that, as I said earlier, 99% of all species have gone extinct, that we may be coming to the end of the human experience and coming into a new relationship in an evolutionary sense to the broader cosmos. That may
probably
revert
pretty rapidly.
And that might be revealing, and that might come out of a well-organized society that might very well be secular, but it would give us a resonancy to interaccommodate the universe at a level transcendent to what we've been throughout 200 years of human existence.
Well, if there's going to be a way for humans to achieve immorality, that's the way to do it. You can't do it by religion. That's just made up. And it's one of the
amazing.
Great scams.
One thing I know about them Chinese, they said it was a curse to be born into interesting times. That's shot to hell, because these are the most interesting times ever, and your work and your writings help to contribute to that understanding of the time in which we live. It's an amazing time. It's been your pleasure to have the perceptions. You can see Grergory S. Paul, research analyst on atheism and theism. His writing is really well recommended. Thanks for all the good work and everything like that with the dinosaur illustration, and also with this work. It's really interesting. We got to keep in touch with you. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Your pleasure.